Hello, Paul. Thanks a lot for joining me on this podcast. It's a pleasure to have you.
Julian, thank you so much. I'm so glad to be translated into French because my name is Paul Gerard. Have a French. I'm from Alsace-Lorraine. My grandfather. So
Oh,
uh,
really?
yeah, yeah.
Okay, French
So
descent.
yeah,
You have a
French
French
descent.
heritage somehow.
Yes, exactly.
But you are American, based in the US, and you've been living there all your life, right?
Yes, I have. Yeah, my great grandfather came from Alsace and came here. I mean, he was very religious actually, and he came to San Francisco during the gold rush. And he opened a bookstore on Market Street to on Catholicism, believe it or not. I mean, and of course he went out of business because it was such a crazy time, gold and prostitutes and money, and so he went down to Santa Clara Valley, which is Silicon Valley now, of course,
Okay.
and he went back to farming and had a farm, and that's where my grandmother grew up. And there was nobody down there. And my grandmother used to walk 9 miles. Can you imagine? It's 9 miles to a convent to go to school. And between her home and the convent, there was only one other house. So
Yeah,
that
it
gives
was
you,
empty.
it was empty. It was, yeah, beautiful farmland, but there was no farmers there at that time. And so that's the history on that side. Yeah.
And this is the region where you grew up to?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I
Pure
mean,
Californian.
5 generations and counting my kids, 6 generations now. Yeah.
Well, and it's not an episode about California and the gold rush, but that would I'm sure you have tons of story to, and I'm always curious about where you come from. But I mean, you've been at the forefront of the topic we're going to discuss today, which is basically environmental, like things and issues. And you've been at the forefront of the thinking around it for decades now. I would like to understand, first, how has your understanding of our ecological crisis evolved, from your early work to now, and especially what fundamental shifts have occurred in your thinking recently, if any?
I, it's a really great question, and thank you for the question because it's the question I have every day, which is that there's logos and mythos. There's what the brain thinks and analyzes, and then there's this greater, sort of capacity of the human being to see things as a whole, I wouldn't say as a whole, but as a vastly interconnected system, that includes consciousness and awareness as opposed to just things. And so there's both parts of me, excuse me, um, look at the world and try to look at the world in both ways. I would say that, being brought up in California and part of the Sierra Club and, being outdoors all the time since childhood, uh, I have an experience of seeing California, as my friend wrote a book once called Going, Going, Gone, which is to see just the enormous development, which is the enormous destruction of one of the most extraordinary places on earth, California, in terms of biodiversity, in terms of, on all levels of biodiversity, in terms of the richness of the soil, the abundance of water. It's quite an extraordinary place on earth. And to see it just being carved up and developed is one experience I have. So that is there in the background. And then I think early on in my career, I was at Stanford Research Institute, and I wasn't employed there, but I was working with two people, and we co-wrote a book together. So I was there all the time, and and they explained to me climate change. This is decades ago, and we understood climate change and the 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 physics of it. If really it's about physics, and decades and decades and decades ago. And what we knew then is all we need to know now, really. There's nothing new that we found out during that time except predictions about what would happen maybe and measurements and the Keeling curve, which measures the increments of CO2 gases in the atmosphere. And so I've had this experience of watching the narrative about climate start then, and then magnified by Earth Day in 1970, of course, beginning of Earth Day, and then all the way up till today. And what I've seen, Julian, is that narrative has been not very effective. And what I mean by that is that it's been maybe less than 1% of the people in the world today do anything about climate on a daily basis. I mean, maybe depending on which country, 30, 40, maybe even more percent acknowledge it and think it's happening, quote, quote, but they don't do anything. And it's interesting that a narrative that started out 40, 50 years ago and so forth, after 40, 50 years and so forth, less than 1% of the world is engaged in it actively, means that it was a failed narrative. And the narrative is about fear and reduction and loss and all the kind of things that people don't gravitate to. They don't say, oh yeah, great, less, more, people move to possibility and they don't move to restriction and constriction and danger and warning and, all those minatory things that the narrative has been about up to this day. And so from my point of view, I've been always, when I got involved in it with the Drawdown is the first book and then Regeneration, and now the new book, Carbon, the Book of Life, has all sort of been a stair-step effort on my part to expand the vocabulary, expand the sensibility of what is possible with acknowledging that where we are, what the situation is, not trying to elude it or pretend otherwise, but to start with solutions and then, which is Drawdown. And that book really was the first effort to actually really describe the panoply, the variety of solutions that actually either drew carbon back down to Earth, CO2, sequestered it, or reduced emissions or stopped emissions.
Mm-hmm.
And then Regeneration, I always knew I was going to write even before I wrote Drawdown. And that was about really the true pathway is to create more life on Earth. That's what we have to do. We're just destroying life. And I'll stop there, but we talk about this, but the narrative, the climate narrative objectified climate, and we're fighting, tackling, combating, and all these kind of male verbs, But the core message, which I don't think people understood that they were doing, was to objectify the living world, to objectify climate, to objectify as if it was an object, a thing, instead of actually understanding that the biosphere, the atmosphere, and climate are really one thing, just different manifestations of one thing. Yeah.
And we'll spend time talking about your latest book, Carbon, because there's a lot to unpack in there. And it's interesting to me to understand also how your own understanding of the problem, evolved, and also your understanding of how to frame it, how to communicate on it, which is kind of two different things. But so what aspects do you think today are still misunderstood or underappreciated, in mainstream conversations around? And there are two ways to frame it, climate issues or ecological issues. And usually, people talk about climate a lot. Some people talk about ecological issues a lot. So what's misunderstood?
Well, what's misunderstood right away is the duality, that they're two different things. The climate, the atmosphere is created by the biosphere. It's not like there's something separate out there that is the atmosphere, that little thin layer that we see from space. It's created by life, living systems, ecosystems, animals, pollinators, fish, ocean. So that is the first problem right there, which is and now you have this like nature-based solutions, which I think is so, it's hilarious, if it wasn't so tragic. But it's emblematic of seeing, and then there's nature. I'm looking out my window at a forest. Okay, like there's nature, but there's climate, and it's as if there was two different types of worlds, two different types of solutions, and things like that. So, and that overwhelms the climate conversation to this day, really. And so you have the verb fix. People want, okay, we need to fix. It's, again, a very male verb. I mean, I'm not trying to be sexist in one way or the other. I'm just saying is this if something you could fix it, and then you have direct air capture and you have BECCS, bioenergy carbon capture systems, and these billion-dollar, kind of proposals and initiatives and companies, trying to draw carbon out of the air as if that would fix it. And so it's again emblematic. It represents how far away we've come from a narrative, that is really accurate and that teaches us and connects us to our life and to our world and to, everything from what we eat and how we grow things to how we travel and how we, relate to each other. That's part of it as well, as if it, and so we're focusing on carbon as an element and like it's a bad boy, it's a culprit, it's doing bad things, and that narrative is just it's reductionist, and it's just all left brain,
Mm.
which is yeah.
Well, and I mean, your work has always been about emphasizing interconnections, from the ecology of commerce to regeneration. Let's dwell a little bit on that. How do you see the relationship? How do you explain the relationship between climate change, the atmosphere, biodiversity, and biodiversity loss, and also things like social justice and other crises? I know it's difficult to talk about the whole system, but I think when you say there is a strong correlation between the biosphere and the atmosphere, a lot of people don't understand it. And I want to understand, how this understanding of all the interconnection has deepened for you also with carbon while writing that book.
Well, even you said correlation, and it's not a correlation.
Hmm.
They're inseparable. So let me give you an example. You're made of gas and molecules, okay, material and gas. You exhale, inhale. So we don't think of you as two different parts. That's what a human being, that's what a mammal does, and even fish do that, take in oxygen, but we don't separate them as two different things, right? And so that's what we've done with the Earth, was we separated the atmosphere and climate, which is an expression of the atmosphere, and it's so right there is fundamentally the problem, because then we see it, as I said, other, like, well, I can drive a Tesla, I can do this or do that, or I'm going to fix things, I'm going to make it better. It's okay to try to do things. I'm not trying to gainsay people who actively try to do things that make things better. But I am saying it's still the mindset that causes the problem. In other words, the mindset that's trying to solve it is the mindset that causes it. It's the same mind. I mean, we have been objectifying, I say we, really the Western world, the colonists, the settlers, the English, the French, and, the Italian, the Portuguese also. For 500 years, we have been basically going around the earth rapaciously, taking whatever we wanted, including people, and selling it to the highest bidder, right? So we're still in that mindset that somehow now BlackRock yesterday announced that they're going to make nature an asset class. I mean, to buy, sell nature, and again, as if asset class as opposed to, fuels, as opposed
Hmm.
to timber, mining, there's nature over here, that is fungible, we can buy, sell it. And it's, again, I just want to say that we're sort of burdened by this way of thinking, and we are trying to solve it within that framework. And so the idea that, that social justice, and somehow, well, that's another problem. We'll get that. We'll get to that, But first of all, we have to make sure that we, survive, that we address the climate, all that sort of stuff, and not see the social justice and the biosphere and the atmosphere are not, absolutely kith and kin, absolutely integrated, inseparable. And so I feel like Carbon, the Book of Life, wasn't trying to criticize. I sound very critical right now. I know I do. I wasn't trying to do that at all. And I don't dwell on that. What I dwell upon, or what I focus on, is how extraordinary carbon is, as opposed to a thing, and that it's about awe and wonder, not about, doom and gloom.
But why did you choose to focus on carbon specifically? Why did you think this element needs its own narrative? Because you have an angle here. A lot of people talk about Earth as a living being or everything connected, and you've got an original angle, which is specifically to dedicate a whole book about the story of carbon. Why did you choose that?
Because carbon is seen as a thing. It's seen as a sort of the bad boy, the culprit, the problem, the cause, And what I'm saying is, time out. Carbon isn't a thing, it's a flow.
Okay.
Carbon's a flow. And to give it some dimension, you have 1.2 trillion carbon atoms in every cell of your body. Okay, every cell. You have 30 to 34 million trillion, cells. And so what are they doing in there? It's a big chemistry set. It's chemistry in every cell, And without carbon, there's no chemistry. There is no flow of life, and so forth. So if that is in one cell, imagine the rest of the world. And so we have to see carbon as this beautiful, beautiful expression. No other element can do what carbon does. There's no silicon-based life forms. There's no iron-based life forms. There's only carbon-based life forms. Well, what does that mean? But it means that carbon has these really extraordinary not capabilities, but I mean, what's the right word I'm searching for right now? But I mean,
Propriety, yeah.
properties, yeah, that is completely different than anything else out there. I'm not saying I'm not saying we don't need water, everything. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that without carbon, we're just a dead rock in space. There's not going to be anything here except just the Earth would look like a big meteorite.
And so, still, like, I want to know what did you discover? What discoveries did you make while researching and writing carbon, that really surprised you and changed maybe also your own perspective? Were there moments also where you felt transformed, when you on where your view on your work, on the way you frame things was transformed by your discoveries? What are the core insights to you also in that investigation?
I think I was just as likely for a long time to look at carbon as a thing as anybody else. I mean, and to try to address it in drawdown, for example. How to bring it back home, how to stop putting it back up. I mean, just that very simple, really, description of what drawdown was about. And I'm not saying people should be aware of that, do that. I'm not gainsaying that. I am saying, though, that it was a very, very narrow focus. In other words, very, very narrow, and not looking at really life as a whole. And then, okay, what is relationship to carbon to life, and what is our relationship to life, the living world? And just the very fact that to this day, in the climate, environment, biodiversity movement, there still is this sense of separation. We have the Conference of the Parties next year in Brazil, or this year in Brazil, last year Azerbaijan. Then we have the Conference of the Parties about nature in Colombia, in Cali, right? And then we have the Conference of the Parties in Dubai on land. We have 3 Conference of the Parties. We have 3 different you know, experts and politicians and, you know, so forth, talking about the earth in three different ways. And that'd be like you're sick, and then you have a podiatrist who studies your feet. You have somebody studying your immune system. You have somebody studying your lungs. You know, you say, wait a minute, you're just Julian. You're one thing, all interacting. You know, and so it doesn't mean you don't address certain aspects of the human physiology as being more effective, but you don't see the patient as a separate components. And that's what we're doing. We're seeing the earth as pieces and parts, and our solutions come from the same
Mm.
thinking.
And your book, you write, and I quote, it flows in rivers and veins, soil and skin, and breath and wind, to illustrate that it's one big thing, which is like the flow of life, basically. To be clear, you know, how this perspective shift, how this, you know, can change our approach to this issue, because as you say, we tend to separate, because I guess it's also easier, you know, to separate so that we have multiple issues, smaller issues. This is what we do in when we have a technical issue. You know, we try to fix things by going at smaller pieces, and then we put things back together. Here it seems that it doesn't work, and this is what you're trying to explain. This one big thing. But yeah, how does it change the narrative and the way to frame the issue according to you?
Well, using the brain, I mean, everything we do is very left brain. Okay, and it's, I mean, we analyze, we separate, we make distinctions, and then we address those parts, pieces, and that's the world we live in, and it's not working. Okay, so it doesn't mean that the left brain doesn't have a role, function, but the other hemisphere, so forth, is a synthetic. It's the one that sees the connections. It sees itself and the world as a system, and a system doesn't respond to mechanical, you know, basic, you know, ideas of the world. You fix this, and this is better, and do this and do that. That type of thinking, left brain thinking, doesn't work for the whole. It does not. It causes more problems because it is blind to itself, but it's so focused on fixing things and so forth that it doesn't see that it is a system. And the system means, how do we, again, farming and food and nutrient density and health and well-being are inseparable, and yet we try to treat them and fix them as if they were separate.
Can you illustrate why this is a problem, you know, to take things separately? Because for a lot of people, I think it's not that clear. Why, if when we try to address, let's say, climate change without considering biodiversity or bioloss, we can come up with the wrong approach and wrong solutions. Do you have examples to illustrate that?
I do. I do. I mean, when an individual does something, whether it's recycling plastic or, you know, planting a garden or, you know, composting or, you know, putting on solar panels on the roof and so forth, bravo. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm not criticizing where an individual finds themselves and starts to express their concern and tries to do something. That I'm not criticizing. What I'm criticizing is the idea that that's going to make a big difference. And what I mean by that is that, let's say everybody has solar. Okay, let's say we do make the energy transition. By the way, I would say categorically we will not, by the way, but that's another subject. But let's suppose we do. Okay, renewable energy to do what? What are we doing with that energy? We are destroying the living world. We're extracting resources and destroying habitats and cultures and the oceans and the fisheries with all that energy. So if we just look at it from an energetic point of view as a source of electrons, or whatever form that energy takes, without looking at the whole, we haven't solved the problem at all. And it's not that solar and renewable energy isn't a great technology and great idea. I mean, solar is invented in the 19th century, solar energy, and wind turbines go back 700-800 years. So, I mean, these are not new technologies. They're being applied to energy systems, of course. But but again, stepping back and look at, well, we have a consumptive society. We have a society that's consuming life on Earth.
In your book, you talk a lot about, you draw heavily on the how do you say, indigenous knowledge systems. Excuse my accent.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand why, because you've got these people, what people we call primitive, sometimes, indigenous, have a very different relationship, with the land, with what we call nature in general. Can you elaborate on some specific insights, from indigenous relationships with carbon and living systems in general, and what do you
Well,
find crucial to understand, and what we can take from them to address the current crisis?
it goes back to the really core meaning or core purpose of the book, which is to for readers to maybe start to see the world differently. And if you see the world differently, it changes you. Rather than write a book saying you should change, which is silly. I mean, not for me to say. It's the other way around, which is that it provides a basis for understanding the world that is different than what people understood before. Now, the thing about indigenous languages, and there's thousands of them, but there's some generalities that you can express and been expressed by the native speakers themselves, by these cultures, which is they don't have a word for nature. Well, that tells you something right away, because they didn't see it as other, as separate, as distinct, or they didn't see themselves as apart from nature. Okay, that's number one. Number two, the very fact that they're here today after thousands and 10,000s of years, in some cases over 60,000 years living in one place, means they kind of knew where they lived. And they knew how to thrive within the metes and bounds of the living world. And over that time, they developed an understanding, an intelligence, a sophisticated intelligence about place that we do not have. Not because they're smarter, because we, again, going to left brain, because we, coming from the Western tradition and the Enlightenment and scientific revolution and so forth, our language and what we are taught and what we do is separate, distinct, name. We're about naming. We're about nouns. There's a million words in English, a million nouns, and so forth. And you can't be a scientist without making distinctions between this is this, that this is not that, and so forth. And how do you study this? And so in our taxa and our botany and our science and so forth, and physiology and so forth, we have tens and tens of thousands of words to describe difference. Okay, that's great. Nothing wrong with that. But it also blinds us, because we are so focused on the differences as opposed to which is not the integration, but the inseparability of the living world and so forth. So the thing about indigenous people, if I can make this generality, and I shouldn't, but at the core understanding of indigenous people, wherever they lived, if they've survived over tens of thousands of years or thousands of years, is reciprocity. Or as they gave and they take. They think you can't take unless you give. In other words, it's a cycle. And we're just takers. We in the West are just takers. And so if you look at the language indigenous language, what you find is it's a language of verbs, not nouns. And the verbs are about what? A verb is about relationship. And relationship is understanding of reciprocity and connection, whereas nouns are the understanding of difference and separation. Now, it's both that are coming together. It's not like one is good, one is bad. They're different. But we do know that the Western way has basically destroyed
Mhm.
much of the living world, but who knows what percent, but much.
But that means that we are in deep trouble, and I think you would agree on that, since all the crisis is rooted. It's not a engineering problem as it's often framed, in the economical world or by industries. It's rooted in our worldviews, in
Yeah.
our relationship with nature, our religion, and the way we do science, and a lot of things. So, if you want to be a little bit concrete and go, and I agree with you on that, by the way. But if you want to be concrete, since also we have a lot of business people or people working for companies that may be listening to this podcast, and not just philosophers or people that will revolutionize our way of thinking globally. And since also you've worked with many businesses, throughout your career. Well, first of all, I would like to know, how has your perspective on the role of business in ecological regeneration has evolved, especially after writing this book?
I, I don't think it's changed very much in the sense that it's simplified, definitely. I mean, it's a
Okay.
simple narrative, and the narrative is basically the only pathway through to where we are, the dilemma that the world is in, whether that dilemma is recognized or not. And it is increasingly being understood and seen, is regeneration. That is, which means creating more life. Now, if we are not in the process of creating goods and services, serving people, and if we're not creating more life at the end of the day, at the end of the year, in our process, in our production, in our relationship, then we're going the wrong direction. Because the degeneration pathway has been well traveled and it's extremely evident in the world today. But what we're also seeing in the news that we get every day about what's happening in the world, whether it's war or whether it's conflict or whether it's hurricane, floods, fire, weather, migration, deforestation, et cetera, et cetera. It's a long list. We get it from different directions. I mean, that's the road to degeneration, pure and simple. And where we are right now is we can see the end of that road. It's like, and that's really
Mhm.
frightening. And people are depressed about it. They turn away from it. They don't want to know about it. They'll whatever. But it's because it's so frightening. And so what is before us is like, well, stop. First of all, just in your mind and your heart, stop. It's like, do I want to continue to go that way? If you're a business, do you want to keep going that way? I mean, so can you turn around? Can you pivot? How do we make the goods and services that we need, by the way, in such a way that the aftermath, the result is to create more life and to provide for the needs of human beings? I mean, that's the question. And I don't have the answers to that question because I'm not a specialist. I'm not in business with this and that and so forth. But there are many, 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 many people and
Mhm.
organizations and groups and companies that are addressing that and are doing that. And so for me, if you're the CEO of a large, multinational corporation, it's like a juggernaut, I mean, you first of all have to look at that and understand what that corporation is doing. You may find that there's nothing they can do. They're okay, but that's the entity, not you yourself. And so, if business isn't having a conversation where biology is absolutely integrated into everything they do, then they're going to become extinct.
Well, I would like to try to unpack that a little bit to see what it means, for a corporation. Maybe we can start with technology, because especially with Project Drawdown, you highlighted a few technological solutions, and yet in carbon, you seem a little bit more cautious about technological fixes. How do you see actually the proper role of technology, in addressing all that, or innovation?
It depends on the technology. I
Yeah.
mean, I can describe technologies that are extraordinary in terms of regeneration.
But
And
maybe I can frame it in two ways, because there is this belief that someday, somehow, we will find key technologies that will sort it all. And and technology anyway is a big word, right? But usually when people think of technology, it's about more something sophisticated or something to invent. It's not like a simple innovation of new ways of doing things. Maybe where do you draw the line? How do you frame the conversation around technology to make a bigger question?
well, technology comes from the root technos, which means to weave. And so, um, and it really comes from actually making fabric, I mean, which is a weaving, which is a real breakthrough in human development, which is to learn to make strands and put them together in a way that makes something, a garment, something stronger, something useful. And so that's the origin of technology. I would say, let's get, what we need now is to weave what we need and want, and, as human beings, into biology, into the living world, into the way life, exists and can reproduce and grow and emerge. And that is where technology went right off the rails. It saw nature as something to take from and use to do something else. All right. And people talk about, well, we feed you, we have mobility, you have houses, you have roads, you have airplanes, you have all these, things, instant communication, which we have right now, and so forth. These are all benefits and so forth. But now we have to rethink everything in such a way that the benefits actually endure, that our children will benefit, and our children's children, and all the other creatures on earth will benefit from our products and our services. And that understanding and that conversation is very, very exceptional right now in the commercial world, except in very small companies. And there's thousands of small enterprises that are doing this and so forth. But you don't see it in big business because it is big. It's difficult to change. It's huge. It's like a big ship at sea. You can't turn it. And shareholder pressure, the drive to increase capital, increase wealth, increase earnings, increase, basically is the drive to get more, take more, extract more. And that is the gerbil wheel into basically.
How do you escape that, though? Because it seems that this is structural, right? Short-term view is related to short-term reporting, and the willingness basically to destroy faster, to produce faster, is related to the fact that it's easier than to try to do something new or to regenerate. What do you see as the most significant systemic barriers, basically preventing businesses from changing?
Well, the biggest thing that's preventing it is intelligence and understanding. I mean, and I would say add to that the lack of innovation, and innovation is always subject to change in terms of what really is innovative. Making something that harms the world and making it bigger isn't innovation. And innovation has to be, in my opinion, so far, something that is integrative, that actually takes into consideration human need and the need of the living world, needs of the living world. And so that's where you need to go. So for example, if you're a food company, okay, so you make food. Maybe you're making ultra processed foods. Maybe you're making foods that actually aren't healthy. Maybe you're making foods that you think are healthy, and like pizza, you think it's healthy, whatever. But really, to go upstream, because all the solutions are upstream, and everything we're trying to do to fix the system is downstream. We used to call that end of pipe cleanup, in the environmental movement, which is you're going to clean the polluted water when it comes out. No, you go upstream to find out where the pollutants are coming into the water. And the same thing holds true for companies right now, which is you have to go upstream. So which ingredients you're using, where are they coming from, which farms, what technologies, techniques, and chemicals and pesticides and herbicides are being used on that farm, and what's happening to pollinators. And because without them, we lose 70-80% of what we eat, and they're crashing in terms of their population, the pollinators. And so you're starting to take that walk or that journey upstream. There's that thing from Bishop Desmond Tutu, where he talks about the story of, being next to a river and seeing people going down the river, drowning and flailing around, and they keep rescuing the people from the river. And finally, somebody says, why don't we go upstream and find out who's throwing them in the river? And so that's really what we're talking about. If you're the CEO or OO or any part of a corporation where you have influence and decision-making capabilities, is to start to go upstream and look at it. And then you're going to find out, well, it costs more maybe to do it. Well, actually, maybe it costs less. Maybe it costs less because the costs that you recognize and you're taking advantage of are put off into the future. Some other generation, some other waterway, some other land, and so actually you're not paying full cost. Okay, good to know. So you now are a businessman using that understanding to change the system within which you are providing goods and services. So it is not simple. It's not easy if you're a big company. It's easier if you start a new company, you're a small little entrepreneur. But it's very difficult when a big one, and you need to actually understand the system, where you rest within that, and then what to do from there. But it goes upstream.
What's the incentive to do that for the incentive to try to adopt this way of thinking as a business? Because as you said, this requires some kinds of empathy, either for the living or for the future generations. And it seems that empathy or long-term thinking is not the quality, that is most required for our leaders today. So do you have insights also for how to sort this out, and for leadership in general, for the people in charge that are listening to us, what are the questions they need to ask themselves?
Sure. Let's go back to the food analogy for a minute, since everybody eats. And food, if it's just about empathy, you're going to do something that is better, maybe better, so forth. What if we think about it in terms of resilience and pragmatism? For example, the world's heating. It heated so much in the last 14 months that scientists cannot explain why it got so hot. And we know it's getting hotter every year. That's not the question, but it's sort of jumped the threshold. And we're seeing a decrease in clouds, increase in, heating, obviously, that relationship. But what happened? Why it wasn't predicted? Okay, so you're getting what's called the evaporative draw. And that, what it means is jargon, but it means is more water is leaving the soil. That's simple. And while moisture and soil and plants are, without which there is no plants, of course. So we're losing water. Water is too much or too little in different places on Earth. You get too much rain or you're getting drought. You're getting too much heat or you're getting unseasonable cold in some places too. You're getting the weather going like this. See, the jet stream is being whiplashed, like it's being a rope being up and down and so forth. And so you're getting extremes in weather, which are affecting yield. So if you understand that, then you are moving to regenerative type systems in agriculture because they do the opposite. They produce more life in the soil. What is holding the water in the soil is life. And if you're using plowing, you're using chemicals, if you're using herbicides, if you're using pesticides, you are destroying the life in the soil. And so it's not going to hold much water. And then you're dependent on maybe uncertain sources of water, or you're more subjected to differences in drought or rainfall and so forth. So if you're a food company, you're going to go upstream because you're pragmatic. And because rather than regenerative, it's a lovely word. I wrote a book on it. I mean, every cell is regenerating. So yes, all that's true. But if you're a company, let's talk about resilience. That is your job. CEO, COO, CTO, well, it doesn't matter what your position is in that company. You have a responsibility to be interacting with your supply chain in a way that creates resilience, because we know what's going to happen in the next 10, 20 years in terms of the weather and climate and heating. That's baked in.
And water resources. A few words about business models. Are there business models or approaches that you have encountered that should be considered as best practices, and also maybe businesses that manage to shift into because this is hard, right, to go into a new business model. But how do you frame these conversations? Have you helped some companies having these conversations? Yeah, what's your take on that?
Every company I know, and I work with several, feels the tyranny of growth.
Okay, sure.
In other words, the tyranny is like, listen, we need to change fundamentally how we do, produce, etc. But at the same time, we have to grow quarter to quarter, year to year in terms of earnings. And so the CEO or the board of directors, whatever, they're caught. They have really, if they don't grow, they lose their job, they lose their position, and they're replaced by people who will make it grow. So I would say that's the fundamental problem, is that the shareholders are remote. They're just family funds. They're, big, I mean, the money is represented by so many institutions, but actually so distant from human need. The only need is to increase capital, increase earnings, increase that.
Yeah, for them it's just figures somewhere, right?
Yeah, and so where's the conversation there? Say, to make this transition, we can make it. We're smart. We're good people, this company. We want to do the right thing, but you got to give us a little slack here. Like, at least not give us a couple years where we don't have to increase earnings, but we will be a better company at the end of 2 years or 3 years than we are right now. If we don't do that in 2 or 3 years, we'll be more vulnerable as a company. But you can't make that argument in this world, which is all about quarterly earnings. So it's a capitalist system that is absolutely punitive to real change.
So can this be achieved within capitalism?
No, absolutely not. No.
So the margin that companies have is very little.
In the system as it exists and so forth, and the only thing that's going to change the system is force. And the force is coming externally. I don't mean somebody or an army or something like that. I'm saying it's coming from the outside, which is the feedback from the earth, from biology, from the living world.
Physical constraints, yeah.
Physical constraints. And that is going to get more and more problematic for us, everybody, everywhere, but also for companies. And so they are going to change. There's no question about it. And they are. You just don't talk about it much.
We kick the can.
Some are kicking the can, and some can kick the can as long as they want. If you're in coal, gas, and oil, you're in good shape, right?
How do you view the Trump administration and its potential impact on I mean, its actual impact on environmental progress, and what are the strategies that environmental advocates or business leaders, can adopt in this context?
Well, I mean, he's supported by billionaires, who got him elected. Just one person, Elon Musk putting in $260 million into his campaign. So, we have separated politics from money. It's supposed to be, politics, and then money was over there. And now
It's a merger.
yeah. So, and we're seeing the result. Nobody can explain Donald Trump. I mean, and so I'm not going to try to, accept, it's the beginning of a dictatorship. It's a fascist dictatorship. His delusions about himself, are now writ large. Hard to say what's going to happen on that one. Who knows? There may never be another presidential election if he has his way, So, so to put that in that context, to understand what to do in that context is difficult, because it's unpredictable what's going to go forward, just like he did with tariffs yesterday, I mean, on Mexico and Canada, 25% tariffs. It's so interesting. Canada, okay, 80% of what we get from Canada is natural gas and oil, right? 80%. In other words, it's fueling basically the United States, heating homes, doing factories, okay? 20% is goods and services. There's actually, the Canadians buy more goods and services from us than we buy from them. Actually, it is what we supposedly want. But it's crazy to put a
Tariffs.
tariff, 25% tariff on yourself. You put it on the Canadians, it's on ourselves. We're going to raise, I heard today, every homeowner in the United States, the average person, is going to pay $1,200 to $1,300 more per year because of those tariffs. Like,
Unpredictable,
so,
as you say. It doesn't make any sense, right?
yeah, you can't explain that. You can't, no.
So, I mean, beyond the US, also in the US, we have the global environmental movements, and that are still there. What do you find the most promising? What gives you hope? Is it changes within the system, or what's going on outside of the system that's trying to grow? Where do you focus your attention to stay positive?
I focus it on human beings, and I'm actually starting a group called the Regeneration Alliance. It's an alliance. It's not supposed to lead. It's supposed to connect. Okay. Here's what I see. When I was young, I lived in the Sierra Nevadas, in the foothills in the mountain of California. Okay. And occasionally we have fires. California's it's a fire-prone state. It always will have fires for tens of thousands of years. So fire's not novel. But we didn't have a lot of fire people there. We didn't have firemen, So we all volunteered. We had volunteer, and then we would go, okay, and we're taught to fight fires. Okay. And so I did that when I was young. And one of the things is that once a fire is put out, you go around and you're looking for hot spots, and you're making sure that there's nothing, glowing or fire, and that's what you do. But it's all black. It's like charcoal, it's on your shoes, it's on your face, it's on your hands, it's on your clothing. It's all charcoal, right? And finally the fire's gone. And the land looks like hell, right? It looks terrible. Trees are gone, brush are gone, animals are gone, there's no birds, there's nothing. All right. In the spring, what you see is grasses that are greener than you've ever seen because they're fertilized by the ash. I mean, they're rich and so forth. You see wildflowers like you've never seen before. In California, you see wildflowers that you haven't seen for 50 or 100 years because they have seeds that only open up under intense heat. The carapace of the seed.
Mm-hmm.
Why did that plant evolve in that way? Who knows? But probably because they evolved in California, which is used to fire, as a geographical region and so forth. And it's so beautiful and so extraordinary. So let me take that as an analogy of what's happening. What we read about is the fire. The world is on fire, literally and metaphorically, no question about it. And the fire is spreading. And we have lots of reportage on that, lots of fear, lots of concerns, and they're all valid, of course. But what we don't see is what's growing. It's simultaneously, it's like not sequentially. What we don't see is what's coming underneath. And there are thousands of small organizations, people, NGOs, communities around the world that are taking the situation we're in and regenerating, restoring, renewing, connecting life on Earth. Every country in the world, without exception. And so we don't see that because that doesn't make the news cycle. It's not a story. What makes a story is what lights up the amygdala, fear, this, that. That's what we click through. That's what the news industry does, because those small little communities like, okay, that's nice. Those are nice kids. Those are nice people. And that's where change starts. It starts with individuals, with people getting together as community, so forth, because all life starts as and exists in community. All life starts as community. Your cell is a community. Your cells together are a community. You are a community. And the fact is, the earth already is starting to regenerate. It doesn't mean that it won't be occasionally obliterated by flood and drought and fire, just like everything else. But what you're seeing is human beings actually, understanding, and then rather than bemoaning the fact or making a bunker and buying guns and storing food, actually working together and connecting. That's happening everywhere, and no one knows about it really, except, some of the communities connect and so forth. I mean, it's known, but not known in a way that actually inspires people. No.
What's your piece of advice to someone listening? And I know there are a lot of them that feel this way, that who feels a bit stuck, because most people work for companies or take part to the system, and we are stuck into consumption, and we spend too much time with our screens and within our virtual worlds. What's your do you have a practical advice something that we can start doing or start changing to build up these connections that you're talking about with ourselves, with the others, and with nature, quote?
Yeah, no, find people like yourself. Find people who are doing something, who are want the same thing, which is to lead a life of meaning given the context of what we're in. And read, seek out, turn off your screen, or make it useful in terms of connecting to. That's why I'm starting the Regeneration Alliance. I mean, it's like, so no matter where you are, in Lyon, okay, I'm in Lyon. So what's going on around there? Wow, this farmer, this group, this, who knew? And so there should be a way, and there will be, for everyone, wherever they are, to find out who their brothers and sisters are, who care.
Don't need to wait for the system to change, right?
No, because, excuse me, no, because you are the system.
We are the system, yeah. All the little dots connected.
Right.
Last question.
Yeah.
If you had a so-called reboot button in front of you,
I like your name.
that resets anything you like, anything you want. I even though I know it's all connected and there's not one solution, but what would it do? What's the most efficient? If it's not the good word, but something that we should really start doing differently, and that could have a huge impact.
Oh, that's such an Archimedean question. If there's some place and there's a lever and you pull it, and it's
Yeah, that's why it's not the perfect question, because I know it's a whole, but yeah, I don't know if you thought about it this way.
Yeah, I do. And the reboot is yourself. Don't worry about the rest of the world. Reboot yourself. Learn actually, literally, where you live. You probably don't know where you live.
Mhm.
You think you do. You may know the history, people, places, the roads, the names, this, all that stuff. No, no, no. People don't know where they live. Let me give you one example,
Yes, please.
it's in the book, but there's a scientist who wanted to understand roots, how many roots a plant has. I mean, the roots gives the plant life, right? And he studied one seed of rye, okay, one seed, a grass seed, and it has 14 million roots. Like, ridiculous. One seed. Those roots have hyphae on them. A hyphae is that place where the root connects to mycelia, the fungi, all right? The fungi, the mycelia, are in the soil and they're interacting with every root hair. Like, okay, what are they doing? They're transacting. So the rye seed, that little tiny seed with all those roots, is donating sugar. Okay, because it's making carbohydrates from obviously CO2 and the sun, photosynthesis, and makes sugar for the plant can grow. It donates 30% of that sugar down to the roots. The roots then use that as currency to get phosphorus, nitrogen, zinc, selenium, but mostly nitrogen, things the plant needs. So the plant is exchanging sugar for nutrients. That's a one rice seed, okay. And how are they doing it? Well, how do they know? How are they messaging? How does the mycelium know that the plant wants phosphorus and not nitrogen? And then if it needs phosphorus, the mycelia, how is it communicating to its network, which is huge and so forth? Who has phosphorus? And bringing it over through these little networks and so forth. I mean, this is happening where you live. And now when you go outside and you look at a plant, look at it entirely differently. Because what we also know from the work of Zoe Slandrup in botany, botany's been discovering that plants have 20 senses, we have 5. And why do they have so many senses? Well, they've been here a lot longer. Second, they can't move, they're sessile. So they needed to develop ways to survive in an environment where their immobility was not a disadvantage, okay? But what we know now from botanists who will talk about it, say the only way you can explain a plant, given all the things that it does and can do, is that it's a brain. It's operating like a brain. No, there's no neurons, there's no this, no that, but the entirety of a plant in terms of perception and translating perception and sensing into activity and change in a very complex way. That's the only way we can explain it. Now, nobody's saying it is a brain, but think of it that when you go outside, look at plants in an entirely new way and look at the ground and the soil in an entirely different way. That's what I mean. We don't know where we live. And when you understand where you live and what's going on, it changes you. This is the thing, is the reboot is your heart. The reboot is your awareness. The reboot is the joy, actually, of knowing that you get to be a human being on this world, on this earth, at this time, with knowledge that other people have never had before. Maybe a sense of it for sure, but not with the specificity and understanding that is arising from the science of today and so forth. Now, when you've rebooted yourself, now you can look at it and say, well, God, this is stupid, or I could do this, or hey, I've met somebody now, and you start to form something that makes sense to you, that makes a difference. And you're saying, well, it doesn't, change everything out there. No, it changes where you are, because the only place you can make a difference is where you are. That's it.
Thanks so much, Paul. Thanks for your time and your insights.
Thank you.